Debating on the motion, this House prefers a world where the majority of individuals live with their extended family instead of only with their nuclear family. Starting the debate with Prime Minister. Here. Thank you, PM. To now start the case coming from OO calling on LO. Here.
Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
All right, give me a few seconds to read my notes. We believe that OO will ensure a better relationship between the children and the parent and producing an outcome of happiness within the family. In my speech, I'll be doing three things. First off, rebuttals on the Prime Minister. Secondly, I'll do my case setup, and also then lastly give my arguments. So three things to be precise on Prime Minister. Number one, the fact that she recognized that the woman is primarily a burden with household and domestic work, but she said that they said that this burden will decrease because everyone contributes little by little. I understand that, but the thing is, they haven't proved to us what incentive there is for this to occur. I provide you a case where this will not, most likely will not occur. Why is this? Because when you're living with, let's say, grandparents, right? Grandparents, which exists a generational gap between the children and the parents, or the parents and their parents, the grandparents. Well, the grandparents are most likely to be more conservative, and this will be said later on my context, but just a hint, because they have little to no access to the modern Western views, so they tend to be more conservative. They tend to be less aware on the issues on the world of feminism and LGBT and so whatnot. So this makes them tend to be more conservative. And in the fact that they are more conservative, wouldn't they put the burden more on the women? So now living with 8 people, with the conservative people, won't they burden more the women in the household to do this domestic work? So I don't see why burden will decrease. What incentive for that to occur on your side? Next thing to rebut is the fact that children are now exposed to multiple views, which will introduce them to different perspectives. The first thing is that what if their parents don't want their children to be exposed to this certain type of perspective or this certain type of ideology? We believe on side OO that it is the parents' authority to dictate what their children will listen to or will hear or will believe in. We on side OO believe that the parent has the right to determine what their children will believe in or learn values from. And last thing is the fact that they said that they have more attention or dedication to time to children. Well, this is contradictory because of two things. First, they said that the parents now, let's say both parents go to work, but then they said they have more time with them. The children won't have more time with their parents since their parents are working. So they will actually just go have more time with the grandparents. No. Secondly, because they concede that less time with parents. This will actually support my point later on. So next to my setup, we have three things in context today. The first thing, that there is a gap between generations, which allows or which produces different kind of views, different ideologies due to different experiences to different times. This creates different ideologies where the older generation tend to be more conservative and the younger generation tend to be more liberal. This is my second context, the fact that older generation is more conservative. This is true, like I said, they are not introduced to modern Western views. They are disconnected from modern world. We can see this by their lack of internet usage or whatnot, or we can see how their reactions are to bodily issues like bodily autonomy or abortion or same-sex marriage. We can see how their political or ideology views are on these cases are more conservative. Third thing, I want to talk about how children are in a nurturing phase while growing up. We have to recognize the fact that this phase is really important, which will shape how they are as a person or as an individual in society later on. And you have to understand these children are like sponges. They will accept what values you teach them or what ideologies you preach on them. So you have to be aware of who you are surrounding your children are. I'm not necessarily saying that grandparents shouldn't be allowed near children. No, I'm saying that parents should have the authority, this is later in my argumentation, to dictate who they receive information from. So what is our path to victory panel? Our path to victory is simple. Our problem is the fact that children and parents have different values, different ideologies, and different views. And our solution to this is for them to live with only our nuclear family rather than our extended family. Two, because the outcome we proceed to see is that happiness is more ensured on side opening opposition than government worlds. So argumentation, I have three. Go
Okay,
ahead,
even if it
Piyai.
is true that elderly people might be more conservative, that doesn't mean that they don't have very valuable lived experiences and advice that they can give to younger people that a parent might not be able to.
Yes, that is true. But however, we believe that it is more important for the parent to be able to see what kind of advice. I'm not saying that just because they live with their nuclear family, they aren't allowed to see their grandparents at all. We have to recognize the fact that when you live with someone, it's very different than you seeing them once a week or twice a month. It's very different because when you live with them, you'll be exposed to a lot more things than if you just see them once or twice. Once or twice, yes, you'll get advice. If you sit with them every single day on a dinner table every single night, you'll see their political views. You'll see them preaching on you to be more conservative, to be more this and that. That's what my response to your POI is. So argumentation, three arguments. The first one, why following parents' ideology? First argument is the fact that we believe that there is a principal right of the parent to determine which ideologies their children follow. We believe that the parents have went through a lot of stuff in order for them to be able to bring this child into this world. So we believe that their mothers went through pregnancy, went through childbirth, all these painful stuff, all these processes, and this all says to us that we should give these people that went through a lot of things, not just physically, but also mentally, emotionally, financially, all these things, all these factors, aspects, we should say that they have the authority, they have the principal right to determine what their children learn, what their children hear, or what their children are taught. So this is why we believe the principal right falls on the parent, not on anyone else. Second argumentation is the fact that why following parents' ideology is better. It is better because we are now have a similar view on with our parents. We believe that that can be used to get closer to our parents. And why is this important? It's important because when our parents are now old, when they are now old, 60, 70 years old, we believe that it is our duty as children to help them, to care for them. And this is done better on our because now we have the closer, stronger bond due to us having the similar views, similar ideologies. And the fact that we believe that this is done through passing parental ideologies and values. Third argumentation is the fact that why parents' ideology is most likely to be liberal. The fact that I said it's more likely because of my contextualization of the generational gap. The gap that exists where if you're older, you're more conservative, and if you're younger, you're more liberal. This is the fact that why we say that their parents' ideology is most likely to be liberal. And it is really important for that because the young generation have a better political view to issues, like I said earlier, on abortion, on same-sex marriage, on LGBT. Those ideologies are now instilled because of their liberal view. With that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder for teams, please take note of your time. Judges are only taking note till 7 minutes and 15 seconds. That said, to extend the case coming from OG calling on DPM. Here.
Hi, am I visible and audible?
Yes to both.
Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think it's pretty clear by the end of that speech that we've already won over by this interaction. I think the key point in which they lose is when they fail to realize that we are not arguing that there has to be some significant difference in what the elderly are like. We don't think that there needs to be some kind of ideological consistency between the elderly and such. It doesn't matter if they want to impart their beliefs or not. Children are nuanced and we have to recognize that. In my speech, I'm going to go over 4 key rebuttals and then I'm going to go onto my argument about efficiency. First, my rebuttal then on women. They say that women will be more burdened now because there's more people within a household. That's just untrue. I think according to this argumentation, you could also say that there are more women now to share this workload as the amount of people in the household increases. But obviously, it takes less effort to make a little bit more of everything than separate households doing the same thing twice. So I think that's just obvious then. But also, I think it's likely that if your like uncle and aunts are staying in your home, they're going to take up the burden rather than the younger children. So already it passes it off, even if they're not necessarily women in that way. But also it means that the younger children who are still going to school are able to have that opportunity. Secondly, then about children. They have a crazy misunderstanding here when they say that we like parents are going to work at the same time that they're also going to spend a lot of time with children. What we're saying is that like the extra family members now are going to be the ones spending time with the children when the parents are out working. I think this is a key point here because it means that you are able to co-opt the benefits of having a good guidance in front of you, which they agree is also a good thing when they talk about like this ideological guidance as well. I think this is really important because it means that when their parents are not here, they're still able to deal with difficult situations. Even when their parents are not here, they still feel like they're loved and their home is a safe place. It's not cold and alone, and they don't have to face things alone when their parents are not there. And also, I think it's likely that they're probably going to like resent the fact that their parents did not spend enough time with them when they were growing up. But this is not going to happen on our side of the house now because at least you're going to have a different person to fill that place and you don't feel that resentment. But then thirdly, about the quality of relationship, they said that there's going to be ideologically conservative elderly, which implies that you'd rather spend less time with these adults so that you don't pick up this value. But I just like to contest if this is inherently a bad thing. I think it's a good counter narrative to what you hear every day. It makes you more nuanced to the world around you. That you get to hear something that's more conservative. You get to hear from a viewpoint that isn't just the echo chamber that is your liberal generation. I don't necessarily think this is bad. But also, importantly, I think children are unlikely to blindly follow what older people say full stop because of alternative narratives, because they want to know why do they actually believe this thing now. If anything, you're creating more nuanced children. But also, if this, I think like for the most zombie-like children, they're probably going to be symmetrical anyways. The wing is that if your parents have bad views or influence you negatively, at least on our side, you have counter influences that balance it out, and that's important aspects here. But also, I'd like to note on the topic of the principled right of parents, I just don't think there's a principled right of parents to necessarily impart their beliefs. I think they can do it if they desire to, but it's not necessarily their job full stop. Their job is to keep a child safe. If it's necessary to give them some core beliefs, like don't lie, don't do XYZ, then that's fine. But I think it's things like political beliefs where their harms actually occur, that it's like you suddenly start following these conservative views that you don't know how to justify and you don't actually believe, and that makes you a less liberal and like understanding person. I just don't think that happens because these are not the kinds of beliefs that your parents are busy imparting on you. It's more basic values on things that will keep you safe, and this is the right that they have, full stop. But also, they tell us that parents are more likely to be liberal. This is kind of in contention with their point about how there's going to be ideologically conservative elderly, because they didn't actually prove why there's suddenly a huge gap between the like what the elderlies believe and what their parents believe. It's just a single generation. I don't understand why they go from extremely conservative to extremely liberal. There has to be some kind of middle ground at some point. They never explain this, even if it exists. Then I'd like to clarify that we never said anything about political views, just having different viewpoints that you can now go and disagree with your parents. But then I'd like to go into my argument now. But before that, I want to do some impacting. The impact here with women is that even if it's a marginal decrease in the burden of the entire population of women, it will lead to concentrated positive outcomes. That is to say, a few extra people in academia makes them more competitive, so there's more published papers from women. But also, there's going to be more women going into politics, full stop. It's going to be a higher likelihood that they actually get into office. I think that is the important aspect. But also in the upbringing of children, it's not just improving relationships as a whole, it's also creating respite for children who are abused that cannot necessarily prove things like verbal abuse or manipulation to like child protective services. Now they have somewhere to go if they cannot do anything else. But also, you have more people that you can look up to. You're more likely to be critical, and you're more likely to be stimulated mentally, see warning signs of problematic behavior that you can identify also in other relationships, like your friends or future relationships with in the future. Then onto my argument about efficiency. The premise is that cities have limited space. Public housing is scarce, and many people cannot afford housing. And this is a big problem. You see this with the fact that there's decreasing birth rates. And a key thing that you tend to quote as a reason for that is that they simply cannot afford to have a family because they cannot house their family. Like they don't have enough space, or like other general financial issues. But the big bulk of all of their money is going to be spent on just affording housing. I think the constant trend of wanting to buy a new house for each family creates an increased demand for housing that simply makes it way too expensive and also leads to unsustainable consumption patterns. But even if that's not the case, even if you're simply using public housing, going from 2 different houses to one means for one extra family to be able to go into a home. I think that's a big delta on our side. But the impact here is it's significant because you're essentially you have the necessary housing. It means that your government has more money to either spend on this housing or public services as a whole in order to encourage people to have families, to encourage people to go to have children, because it's a key problem in our society already. I think this is a much more economically viable solution where you increase the amount of people who are able to have the means to actually have a family in the first place. Then the way here. Regardless of whichever side is better for child outcomes, it is true that the government saves significant amounts of money on housing. This greatly reduces financial strain on families. They can now spend money also on their own children, better education for them, which is only going to result in them having better outcomes in life. Maybe they get a better job and they can care for their family better. Maybe they're productive and they end up bringing tax money into the economy. I think the key point here is that children and giving them slightly better education, giving a slightly better living condition is going to lead to significantly more nuanced people who are more and I think that, also another impact of why it's important to have people who are able to see nuanced views is that this also leads to significantly better understanding of the political world, which is necessary for future positive legislation. I think our impacts are big because they are widespread and they're very obvious and they're certain to happen. And for that, I've never been prouder to propose.
Thank you, DPM. To extend the case coming from OO calling on Yellow. Here.
Sorry, can you give me a minute? I'm moving locations due to Wi-Fi problems. Sorry.
Sure.
Okay. What was that? Okay. Oh, sorry for the tour of my house. Okay, I'll set up my timer for a while. Oh. Confused. Okay. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Several contexts that government side choose to ignore what have been told by my first speaker, right? First is that there is an actual gap between generations, that they hold different views, they hold different ideologies, and they hold different experiences. They didn't give us any reasons why this is not true. They just said that it's okay that they have different in like ideologies. We say the moment that they have these different ideologies, and when you are left with your grandma, and your grandma keep telling you that liking guys are wrong, this is what you will like listen to, and you will grown up to be like whatever your grandma told you to be, right? Because sure, they're elderly and they're like wise, but in this particular case, they're not exposed to the modern world, and therefore this particular child will be a homophobic bitch when a homophobic person when they grow up. But second, we already told you that the further in the generation, the further back in the generation, the more conservative people are, because of like modern news and modern ideologies. They go to them, they literally just fought the war, and that's it, right? So the things that they know will be like, oh, the nationalism spirit and whatsoever. But third is the lack of awareness of the world towards this old generation. They are disconnected from the modern world. But last but not least, we told you in our context that children are in the nurturing phase when they are growing up. This means that they will accept any ideologies that your grandparents or your grandma tell you, or your uncle, and this is an important point in their life because who they will be in the future. Because moving on to my like responses, then the first concept like was mentioned by second speaker from government is that they say that children are nuanced. Note that it's a one-liner. There's no reasons why children are nuanced in the first place. Note that it's simply not true. Children don't know anything, that they are raised, they follow directly, blindly, whatever your grandparents and your grandpa tell you. If your grandparents say not yet, that you cannot do stuff, you will not do that, right? This is the whole monkey see, monkey do. These are children. It is simply untrue to say that they are nuanced and they can like, oh, Mama told me this, Grandpa told me this. Now there's an entire like these children have to think like everything, and it creates a whole spiral in this children's head mind, and we say that's not okay, right? Okay, not that this exclusively happens when they live together, because we told you that they will still visit in order to get these good values, right? But when they stay together and see each other 24 7 days a week, this is when this ideology is stuck to them. They don't have an option to opt out, right? Because it's always going to be there. Whew. Several issues then to rebut. Not yet. The three arguments coming from side government. The first issue is whether it is better for women. OG said it's better for women because it help in cooking and cleaning, and there's more division of labor, and the impact is that women can now work. Several questions towards this, right? First is the assumption that there will be more helping hand in the first place. I'm unsure who will be the person that will be helping. Are these small children that are supposed to go to school, or are these like old elderly sick people that will help you do these house chores, right? Because it will be actually be burdening the woman more, because now you will live with your conservative in-laws that literally ask you to do all the housework and house chores. Basically, you can't even like go to work because of these in-laws in the first place, like expecting you to like, oh, do that. And even they don't even allow you to go to work because they're expecting to have a lot of grandchildren in the first place. We all know why we hate our in-laws, and you're basically like telling people, oh, you'll live a better life, your in-laws will help you. That's completely false. Not that having this conservative idea, this means that your grandma and grandpas are against women working. They told you to stay at home and you need to have child, and the only purpose of women is to have child. Like, I don't agree with that. Note that on your side is like way harmful towards the woman, because there's more labor to do to take care of this elderly. But on comparative, on our side, you can go to work because you don't have your in-laws or your mother telling you to be at home and take care of your child, and you can have proper planning of family, because conservative ideologies don't allow you to have proper planning of ideology. You must get married and you must have a child. In our world, women will be happier. Second, whether it is better for children. They say that there will be better relationship, they will be able to help, and they can get a second opinion. Not that on our and actually, in actuality, will be worse to children, because not that their grandparents themselves or uncles or aunties can be a burden to them. This is when at some point they will need to change the diapers of this elderly, take care of the sick, when the most important like duty of the children is to focus on their school and developmental and play, right? This is when you like establish an additional burden towards children. But also note that grandparents tend to baby the children, right? Baby the grandchild. This is when you are not allowed to be disciplined by your parents, because every time your parents trying to hit you with a hanger, this is when you will run to your grandparents and you will not be disciplined. Basically, you'll be a spoiled brat. Third is that not that it is against the teaching methods. Your grandma and grandpa and your parents have different teaching methods. This is when more fights happen in the household, because both like parental figures have different ideologies. Four is not allowing modern ideologies to opted by parents, right? Because again, you can still see them to gain this important information, but on comparative on our side, children are allowed to be children and they can focus on what is important in children's life, not to like take care of their elderly parents, which is supposed to be the responsibility of their parents, right? Yeah.
All you did was counter-assert our claim. I said that there are now alternative narratives from people that you trust, because your family members are likely to have diverse opinions from diverse life experiences. Obviously, children aren't units in status quo because there's only few sources of trusted opinion.
Yep, thank you. Definitely. It will look like fighting in the family. It will look like generational trauma towards the children, because literally they don't know what to believe. Third is whether there will be more time to children. Note how very contradictory this point is, because they say that women can go to work, but also women can spend more time with their children. You know that this inconsistency, I have no idea how this works. But note that they also say in their second speaker that when women go to work, they will live with their aunties and uncles and grandpa. This is when the ideological problem that we contextualize happen, right? But this is when there will be less connection with your parents, and in the end, not that you are like expected to be giving back to your parents. Now you literally love your uncle more, and then when you grow up, you literally say, oh, I don't have like what mom? Basically, because you like basically live with your uncle, right? But so what this entails will be, it will be like you don't have enough time with your children anyways, because you are shifting your responsibilities to others. Not that now people will be work focused and only wants to get job. You will neglect and push the burden to your like mom, to your grandma, basically lah. And not that your grandma, firstly, cannot raise these children effectively. They already contributed a lot to your life. Now you're like pushing your baby onto her, and basically you're really unres yeah, you're really bad child lah, in order to give like to like push this burden onto her. Although you're not helping the elderly, the children cannot do anything in any way. Thank you.
Thank you, DLO. And to start the case, coming from the closing half, starting with CG, member of government. Here.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, and you are visible.
All right. I'll take POS in chat. Starting in 3, 2, 1. 3 extensions, 1 on money, 2 on how our world with extended families provides a better modeling for good families, and thirdly, in terms of dealing with family coercion. Before all responses integrated, but there's one thing from OO that says that nuclear families are necessary because we need to have a cultivating environment for children. Otherwise, they'll absorb like conservative values from their parents. I would just say that the younger generation today is incredibly exposed to media of like diverse natures. So it doesn't mean that just because you have parents that are really conservative that you're not equally exposed to other kinds of media that enlightens you of like more liberal ideologies, and like your conception of political stances are likely arbitrary and not like entirely dictated by the kinds of circumstances that O wants to talk about. So I'm not really sure if that's the tipping point to get everyone to exist within nuclear families in the first place. First extension on family. I have two strands under this. Firstly is on centralization of resources within a family. OG just says that you presumably get more people working and you defeat misogyny, etc. Our question is just how misogyny is defeated. We're not exactly sure, especially since overarching social values would still persist within society. We say the completion to this argument is that you get better financial planning and better financial management because all family members existing within that one umbrella means that you have to centralize resources and ensure what the output is weighed against the input and manage resources in a healthier manner to ensure that every single person is catered to. So there's more transparency in terms of what money is being used for what avenues, and there's more discussion and more communication for what better ways in which you can allocate resources to ensure the family prospers in the long run. But second strand of this extension is just in terms of land allocation. So OG just says that it's expensive to have land, etc. We say that multiple family members living under one room as opposed to different homes for different families is incredibly good, because on our side, that excess land that has to be used to house like different families within opposition role can be used for other things like having schools or different state structures being propped up. We get better utilization of resources. We have less wastage of like money and resources that could have been like poured towards channeling things like state welfare, healthcare towards people on the ground. This is incredibly important for 3 reasons. One, land development now tends to be quite suburbanized, meaning people often tend to drive very far from their existing suburban like housing complexes to access resources like state structures and state welfare systems. So on our side, with more land, you can allocate land to house stuff like state structures that are far more important and ensure that those access to resources are far easier to access for people, for families in general. Secondly, we say states spend far less in terms of sustaining families within society. So not only do you get centralization of resources within the state also spends far less in terms of getting people to access provisions like water and electricity. So like simple math, like it's a lot easier to funnel electricity to one extended family than spreading that provision of electricity to like 10 different households across 10 different locales, right? Thirdly, there's a multiplier effect. So states being able to save up from infinitely numerous homes and families means that there's far more budget that the state can utilize to improve the lives of all these families in the long run. Why is this extension debate winning? OG's extent of analyzing this is just to say that it's expensive to have families. I'm not sure what the outcome of this is. Ultimately, family dynamics are speculative. We're not privy to the kinds of family dynamics that each family is likely to hold or practice. This means you ought to default to our side to more certain and more guaranteed benefit of better state operations under our side. If it's true that there's no one true metric upon which a family is better than the other families, then presumably under our side, we are the team that ensures that states have the maximum and optimum amount of resources to empower families to be the best versions of themselves and provide a big nurturing environment for everyone within the family to prosper and live good lives within the family. Second extension of how this our world of extended families provides a better modeling of good families. This addresses OO's concern of existence of generational gap and differing socio-political viewpoints, which leads to strained relationship. There are two ways in which we overcome this. First, we get a bigger ability for family members to confide within each other. The way this works is that in extended family under our side, you have people that you can talk to and communicate with more meaningfully. So if your grandma is homophobic, for example, or has conservative values, either A, they can have their aunts and uncles within that family that they can communicate with or talk to and relieve their feelings, or you have siblings that are more aligned with your liberal viewpoints that provide you with a bigger countervailing force to communicate with your parents or elderlies to show that I may be gay, but I'm still the person that I am today, right? So even if nothing good comes out of it, you have the support of your family members that align with you, which provides you with more solace as a result. But number two, because you exist as a larger family unit, it is less likely for family members to want to lash out in a way that destroys that entire huge family dynamic as a result. Compare that to within a nuclear family where these elderlies feel more pent up in terms of not being able to relieve of the kinds of opinions that they have, and they become more aggressive in lashing out and superimposing their political viewpoints onto their kids in the long run. That's when your kids get far more fucked up in the long run. Secondly, in terms of calling out abuses, we would say that the way this works is that with a larger family structure in place, you have more sets of eyes looking at how one family member is treating other people. So you get more ability to confide in people and sort of have all of these people backing up and calling out abuses and say that this is something that they should not be standing for. That does not exist given the separation of family units within opposition role. This is also incredibly important if you want to champion for the rights of younger people within society today. Before I go on, yes, Rita.
So why is it that I cannot call up my friend or my very close family member on opposition?
So you don't exist within that family unit. So you're not privy to what is happening within a family unit. On our side, you live together. There's more in daily interactions and you feel the kinds of microaggressions that exist. Third extension on dealing with family coercion, two strands firstly on continuing family legacy. So on opposition, if you exist within nuclear families, you still fundamentally view yourself as separate family units in which you're beholden to duties of extending the family tree. And this is most pervasive within traditional contexts where culture is deeply ingrained within families to pressure their offsprings to procreate and have their own families. In an extended family unit, the pressure to procreate becomes more dispersed among different children within family, which means especially because you see yourself as a huge collective unit. So it's better for the youth because they're subjected to less pressure to procreate. And lastly, in terms of pressure to move out and establish your own family unit, on opposition, the norm is to establish your own family unit and live separately as a nuclear family unit. So this is, if it's true that parents have archaic viewpoints regarding family structures, on opposition, you give more ammunition for society and parents to push kids to move out once they've grown up, and therefore you compound the kinds of pressure that that kids deal with today in times of economic recession, for all of those reasons, CG.
Thank you, MG. And to start the case coming from CO, calling on member of opposition, here.
Hi, am I audible?
Audible and visible.
For pure eyes in chat. Probably take one from opening if you have one. Also, that photo of Ian needs to go to jail.
No, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. You do appreciate it.
Interesting. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm gonna just quickly get rid of the ridiculous assumptions, specifically on the idea of housing. The first thing to know is just a problem of space. So just if you have bigger families, you have to build bigger, so the housing space still a bit bare anyways. So if the problem is that people have more housing. The solution is we have built up, but the problem is that it doesn't solve the difference of population. So bigger houses still need to be done for bigger families. Two, housing is also something which doesn't solve the problem of population. Also suggests as well that a house with 8 people still consumes 8 people worth of electricity anyways, so the cost doesn't change. But lastly, poorer countries often cannot build these larger houses, making it very difficult. Cool. Our stance is very simple in member op. Familiarity breeds contempt. For a debate on families, neither of these houses show how families in either paradigm will function. OG suggests that OG is out because they're not mutually exclusive. You can also have alternative views on social media and from your other friends. There's also zero reason to engage or to buy any of the outcomes. OO is out because they don't show you why living together is bad. The outcomes are not viable because you don't put into the problem of family dynamics specifically. CO will be the first to do so. So the first thing we want to establish is what is the family difference in terms of dynamic. First, for extended families, it's obligation. The first thing to characterize them by is ought to. You repay with proximity because your survival is directly tied to your parents. Therefore, you ought to pay them back by proximity and by staying with them. Two, it's also important in terms of survival in numbers, which suggests as well that any defaulting of these individuals from the group is a threatening to their survival, therefore having a large incentive to keep them together in that group. Because any leaving, therefore, would be punished with like some level of external threat. In the beginning of time. But so this is why this arises your like Asian cultures, for example, right? Where it's very large dynastic families, your Peranakan cultures, for example. The comparative on their side is independence, it's survivability. It's the American perception that you ought to strike yourself up by your bootstraps. Two things. The first is that you discharge your duty not by proximity, but by just giving up, like by showing that you are a good person. But two, that your survival in numbers is also significantly less. This is important because now the thing I'm going to tell you right now, is how this dynamic plays out. Why is it specifically that you're likely to foster significant amounts of resentment on the comparative? On their side of the house, firstly, on scale, the number of people in government is more, so you're unlikely to be close to all of them just by probability alone. But like they say that you have more probability of you liking the individual, but that makes no sense because it's Schrodinger's like probability, it's Schrodinger's like closeness. It's like what the same can also be argued, which is that like the more people you have, the more people you don't like. But two, on the comparative, the people closest to you as well you get to be with those particular people. But two, oftentimes that these people often cannot be ignored precisely because of the proximity. This is the biggest extension I'm going to forward here that takes us over our opening. Because of the reverence you give older individuals, especially within these societies, and the respect you give them. So they like it's not just conservative societies, right? It's the fact that like many of these people in these families view their elders as people who are directly responsible for the prospering of their like family and therefore ought to stay within there. But two, it's considered bad to leave. That many of these family structures prevent you from leaving or like sanction you for actively leaving precisely because leaving in and of itself is seen as for example abandoning your elderly, not discharging your responsibility. That is why dynastic houses are so hard to leave precisely because of the immense amount of guilt you feel both internally by suggesting that I feel like a failure because I'm not giving back to my family, but also by externally, right? Where individuals tell you that you are a failure. Third, that oftentimes relatives are significantly more nosy. That is to suggest that many extended families compare you to other people. All of us here, to some degree, in some family function, have had to be compared to another cousin who got all A's or who is an amazing or who's Bosio. Like the bigger problem here seems to suggest as well that many extended families compare you, but it's also significantly easier to do so when you're always proximate. So every detail is now scrutinized as to why specifically you as an individual are a failure. Two, because it often in order for you to save living together also ties your lives irrevocably to each other, right? So, i.e., that me not liking you has a very tangible result in terms of how the family ought to, like how the family functions, right? So, if I don't like you, you can make my life a living hell by psychologically tormenting me, by physically tormenting me, or even just by like a bombastic side eye every day. The bigger problem here is that I have to see your face but with no form of recourse. But also I need to swallow my pride and not bring up these issues precisely because it might tangibly affect me. But lastly, because in order to save space, there's increased responsibility to take care. Therefore, there's a plausible deniability. What I'm suggesting here is that it's a lot easier to get away with abuses because they can often be masked as discharging responsibility. Before I move on, OG.
Look, all your speculative claims on whether or not people like their family, if they're happy and they want to stay, like that's like very speculative.
They
At
are
least on
not
our side, we
speculative.
guarantee that you give more attention
They
to
are
your
not
kid.
speculative. That's one. I literally just give you 4 systematic reasons. 2, you are more speculative. 3, My speculativeness is better than yours in terms of like debate clash. Next, why is it specifically that independence gives you significantly better things? It affords you the ability to have some independence and opt out of these things, right? So you all not to rely on parents, but also suggests as well that when you move out from your extended family, the first is that there's reduced amount of prying eyes, so you're able to get significantly more solace from individuals you don't like. Two, that it exists on our side as well. Allows you to space away from these expectations, right? But they exist on our side significantly more, precisely because it's significantly more sporadic. But even for the family members you don't like, you're more likely to give grace to these family members and not let this like resentment fester within you. For the very reason because like it's intermittent. So the one aunt who constantly calls you fat in a family gathering is kind of endearing when it's just once every year and you can be like, oh my god, it's just that aunt. But if it's every day that person calling you a particular slur, for example, that's at the point in which it becomes significantly worse. But lastly, you don't have to answer to these people giving you significant more freedom. Why is this important? Here is the two very big benefits. The first is on resentment and it being less. I think this is important because the people you otherwise would have been okay with supporting now become your enemy. So there's more probability of you like doing things like fighting with your parents, fighting with your grandparents, fighting with your cousins. These things often result in things like, for example, physical violence, but also it's often extremely draining and gets you significantly less sympathy for your other individuals. Therefore, you're more likely to have an extremely chaotic household that prevents anyone from having any peace. But the comparative is you get to choose who you want to be with. So I go to my aunt's house, for example, to get solace. This is also good, but also the people I click with in those like small pockets of family gatherings, I can then choose to extend my emotional familiarity with these individuals precisely because like I want to, so you get the element of choice. But also space is often extremely important because these are often things and like which you require in order for you to just feel happier and feel more fulfilled in general. Because you get better families and better individuals feel nicer about themselves, go with closing up.
Thank you, MO. And to close the debate, coming from GovBench, calling on GovWhip. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Loud and clear, and you are visible.
Cool. Give me a moment. I need to go drink my water. Cool. Apologies for the very raspy voice. I drank a bit too much yesterday, and now my voice is a bit like fucked. But I can still talk, and hopefully that's fine. So, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, political ideologies are unclear. Families can be conservative or liberal independent of the size of the family, and the scope of the work is unclear. So, yes, it's true that you have more people taking on chores, but you also have more chores to do. So, at best, it's also a wash because teams don't really prove the marginal differences this really makes when it comes to a lot of the impacts that both opening houses really want to claim. So, let's first talk about conservative grandpas. This argument doesn't make much sense. You can be a conservative grandparent, but it also doesn't mean that you don't care about your children any less. So even when there are different ideologies, that different applies similarly to the nuclear families, where parents tend to also be a bit more conservative than their children, for example. But just to engage, I don't know why there's incentive for grandparents to shove ideologies down the throat of their grandchildren, which will only create more hostility and more resentment within the family dynamic. But secondly, I would argue that the opposite happens. The closer proximity between family members in an extended family dynamic means that grandparents and other relatives are more receptive to different ideas. So when your grandchild is participating in a protest or is very involved in activism, for example, justifying it to your grandparents is a lot easier because like they see you as part of the family. They see you as someone that they ought to protect. So grandparents are more open to diverse ideas precisely if it is coming from someone that they love and care about. So you're more receptive to these kinds of ideas on the outside of the house. Secondly, on that principle, This principle is dangerous because it views children to be objects and commodities that are subjected to the whims and the desires of your parents. Their justification was that they gave birth to you, but it doesn't make sense. A, you never consented to being born, so that obligation to satisfy your parent is one that's imposed upon you without arbitrarily. But secondly, your parents can give birth to you and raise you, but it doesn't mean they can abuse or torture you. So it's unclear to what extent this principle that truly does matter, or whether or not this right even matters in the first place. Thirdly, they then limit this principle by saying that this principle about imposing ideology is fine only when the ideology is liberal. It's unclear as to why that's likely going to be the case. Let's move on to the stronger claim coming from OO, which is the claim about upbringing of the child. This OO team provides a lot of reasons as to why family dynamics are going to be dysfunctional. The first response is that there are various internal check and balances to ensure that responsibilities and burdens are shared proportionally. So if a parent is being negligent, for example, you can have your aunts or your relatives calling out these bad behaviors to ensure that they also do part of their work and part of their chores as well. Secondly, is that even when parents have the incentive to take care of their child, the problem is the lack of capacity. So parents under the nuclear model are forced to work overtime or come home late simply to put food on the table, which means that the incentive to take care applies symmetrically, but the capacity to do so only manifests under extended families where disposable income can be used to allocate to whoever needs it the most. Thirdly, the third is that OO team doesn't really provide any sort of incentive to completely self-destruct the family dynamic. They say that family members will push burdens disproportionately or fight for attention, but it's unclear as to why they want to do so. Luckily, they want to also make sure that they have a consistent pool of money. They want to make sure that people within the family stay as harmonious as possible. So the likely way in which they're likely going to do this is to make sure that they resolve this conflict in a very meaningful way as well. And this moves on to CEO's idea about family dynamic. Obviously, this is very speculative and very individualized. So your family members can compare, but your family members can also encourage and praise you, for example. So it's unsure as to why this is the specific exact form of interaction that family members would have opted into under CO. But secondly, in fact, the opposite happens because the prolonged interaction that you have humanizes family members more. So when you confide your problems with your cousins or your relatives, when you share your moments of joy and sorrow with your grandparents, or you interact more with them on a more intimate and more emotional basis, for example, they see you as being human. This mitigates the worst kinds of interaction because the reason why family members are demeaning and condescending under status quo was because they don't see you as being human or valid enough to justify or to be worthy of things like praise, for example. Secondly, obviously, if your aunt keeps calling you fat or keeps degrading you, for example, these are universally detestable things for you to do. So you can still collectivize with your cousin. You can still call out these sort of problematic dynamics that you have with other people within the family as well. So it's unclear as to why this particular aunt has more power over everyone else within your family that's also suffered from the aunt being equally demeaning or being equally condescending as well. So yes, this is a problem, but on the outside of the house, we experience why the ability to do so can be done far better when you collectivize around family members to ensure that these behaviors, which are universally detestable and universally frowned upon, are actually called out for what they are. Thirdly, there's also just more rooms of conflict resolution to happen. So your family members, like your aunt or your uncle, aren't doing this for very malicious intent. They usually do this because they have nothing else to talk to, or because it's the only thing that they can talk to, for example. So in most instances, they aren't doing it because they view you as they're not doing it maliciously. It usually comes from a place of ignorance and misunderstanding. So the best way to clarify and the best way to make sure that you're able to deepen that kind of relationship is by just making sure that your aunt sees you as human. So you're more comfortable opening up and saying that I'm actually not cool being called this particular slur. I'm actually not cool being compared with this particular person, for example. And your aunt is likely going to understand you far better because at least you're able to have the kinds of room and the kinds of ability to call out these behaviors while not doing it in a way that's necessarily hostile, because obviously they still view you as human, so you likely feel more comfortable engaging within these ideas. Before that, sure.
Cool. So, the closest you get with your family must come at the compromise of you being able to form relationships with everyone outside of your family. Even if I buy it's true that you have a very close relationship with family, does that not come at the compromise of literally everyone else?
No, you can interact with your family and interact with your friends. It's a very simple idea. Interaction isn't a trade-off. You can have multiple interactions as well. This means our extension matters the most because our first extension explains why the size of the family allows for more accountability to call out problematic behavior. Because when it's a child against their parents, for example, the unbalanced power dynamic means that children tend to internalize and pass on very problematic behavior. This means above all else, because a lot of the OG impacts are social by nature. So things like misogyny, patriarchy, conservative ideas are social projection. They wouldn't have otherwise changed because of the size of the family. This also tackles the worst problem within families, which are abuses and negligence, which are usually quite prevalent. This debate isn't about cost, isn't about women, it's about the exposure to different viewpoint. Then it's about the dynamic of the family and how it actually applies realistically. The second extension explains as to why housing is better. So the problem now is that whenever you need to go to a hospital or a school, you need to drive a very far road because oftentimes the way in which housing is built right now is there's a large pool of houses because there are so many different families in one particular region, which means in order for you to access things like hospitals and schools, for example, you have to go to another part of the city that actually develops these types of areas as well. So the problem here is that because it takes up a large amount of land, that land is used for housing as opposed to anything else. So even if consumption is the same, the usage and the space of the land is significantly different and significantly better on the outside of the house. So for all those reasons, very proud to propose.
Thank you, Whip. And to close this whole debate, and as well as Op Bench calling on Op Whip. Here.
Hi, am I visible and audible, Joe?
Yes to both.
Thank you. Just give me a sec. Okay. For POIs, just raise your hand. Yeah, then I'll take you. If I have time, I want to take you. Then you can just refer to me as. Well, actually, no, the last is speak. So yeah, you don't need to refer to me. Okay, starting my speech. In 3, 2, and two observations on the top of my speech. First, you can't win by assuming the morality of individuals because people are different, but by explaining behavior, which is what we did, which is the premise of because you're closer, there's likely more control, there's more chance for independence, everyday interaction, involvement, etc. That premise alone wins. But second observation is that CG still assumes that there's good morality to exist and good choices to be made with no incentive analysis of why that happens. To reply to CG, firstly on their whip, then on their just main case, firstly on their whip, on the idea of better lives, we think it is worse for them because of the more family duties, because of just more people in the household, more elderlies that may be dependent on you, meaning it's harder to form meaningful relationships outside of parents because you have less time. And this also responds to their idea of proximity equating to reception and good vibes, because proximity can also equate to dependence. In fact, it is more likely to equate to dependence, meaning that you might trauma dump your parents on accident because they're the people you spend most time with, or your cousins, and they may not receive you well. Thirdly is on the idea that you're seen as a commodity. The same can happen with the justification that you're blood related. Take note, legacies extend way past nuclear parents too. Now, do you even solve this with your father's brothers who were raised the same way? We think that's very speculative. On us being speculative, we think it's not true, because we say there are chances for good and bad interactions, but bad interactions are way worse because you live with them, because it's exacerbated by the everyday. But also, way this mechanization is independent on harmony existing or not. And 5, they are not responsive to the prisoner's dilemma that we are pushing and just being trapped because of this large family, meaning that you have limited time on this earth because you're close to a lot of people. And being just close to a lot of people means you spend a lot of time with them. And a lot of family members mean you spend a lot of time with a lot of family members. So they cannot have their cake and eat it too, because they're just arguing that you have just more time in the house because you're spending more time together and splitting all the duties and doing all this planning, but you also have many time for friends, or enough time for you to form meaningful relationships with friends. You have to take the former. On their main case, on just firstly on how a big family means they would just become a bank, like they would just have central planning and like equity programs and shit. No, because this assumes that they get along in the first place. We are unsure if they will all get along, but even if one person doesn't get along with the family, that is chaos, because one bad actor can overspend, one bad actor can steal their funds. This is chaos. You cannot just take this argument on face value value. Secondly, on the idea that better families, because people can be safe spaces and defend you, we question how successful this even is, especially given my past responses, but how exclusive they are in the first place. Wade explains that this is like that this is something that is just not likely, or that this is something that is very unsure. But I also say that in fact it is just way worse when resentment happens, and it's way worse than the support that they can give you, or the support that a 45-year-old sort of well-meaning person can give you. I'd say that spending more time with your friends is better. Third, on how you're coerced to continue the legacy and the pressure to be an extension of your parents. You're also pressured to be an extension of your cousin who may be a celebrity, or your tito who may be a politician. This is just weird. Fourth is just on the housing thing. If it's not already destroyed by Weda, we think it's just equally likely that unused land will be stolen by landlords. Like, they assume the government's good, whatever. Why then do we are we just debate winning first? Firstly is that independence is winning and debate winning and important for three reasons. Firstly, it is the liberation, or the increased chances of liberation from emotional turmoil, which is the requirement to be happy and to live a comfortable life. So regardless of the relationships that may form, we think that independence is something that is just less likely, no matter how good they may be to you. You may feel good, but you are strapped down, you are chained. Secondly, is that solace is something that is guaranteed, even if you may be less financially supported. We think that is fine. Just the breath of fresh air of being in your own dorm, for example, is something that we take as extremely valuable for an individual to even start to develop their own personal development and their own personal goals. Third is that you get less resentment, which on a meta scale solves the big problem of tension and negative energy that each team tries to ping pong at each other. Take note, what we said, and this is the second reason why we're debate winning, is that we argue based on at least what are the most likely things to happen. Like, I don't think it's the most likely thing that elderly people equals bigots, young people equals supportive. Like, I have a cousin that is toxic. Take note, proximity, what we said is proximity equates to dependence, equates to a threat to not leave, especially in Asian households, because you may be like rejecting family values, meaning resentment, which we argue is just stronger than love, because something that takes a lot of your time, especially if your sentiments every day and on the next door to you, creates hierarchies, meaning you are trapped, meaning you may feel failure if you don't live up to their dependency. You may have a lack of privacy as well. You may feel insecure. This is exacerbated by the torment of the possible toxic person. We don't think it's a guarantee that there may be toxicity, but when there is, it is bad and you can't fight back, because your father's brothers, your mother's sisters, who likely have been raised in the same toxic way, assuming the parents are toxic, will likely support your parents. We actually challenge toxic hierarchies, therefore, even more than CG, because the ability to leave is higher when there are less people on your back, when there's no prisoner's dilemma. But before I go on to why we beat opening and why, just more reasons why we win, I'll take OG.
Regarding being able to leave, your parents will let you go if it's for something like a really good job. But obviously, you'll be willing for them to dislike you when you leave if it's a bad relationship, anyways.
I don't get the point of that POI. Like, yes, they can dislike us if they're toxic, but it's just harder to leave when there are more people on your back, more elderly people you have to take care of. Anyway, we beat opening then because both teams assume a behavior. OG assumes good people, OO assumes they're a bunch of bigots all around the place. This is too simplistic argumentation for them to even get second, Jill. What we said is that regardless of what is true about opening's assertions, what are the benefits and harms that stem from this family system, which is what we actually analyzed. Because it is fair to say that yes, you may get a safe space, but it is equally as fair to say that you are chained down, that you may be put into a feeling of dependence. You may be put into a prisoner's dilemma. OG has a fair idea of safe space, therefore, but we think it's just better for us because if the person who is your safe space or the tito who is your safe space lives somewhere else, you can actually escape to them instead of just them being beside your door next to your father as well, who might be very toxic to you. And also on the idea of nuanced views, we question why this is exclusive. It is better for us if you get these nuanced views from teachers, from people outside your family, from your friends. And on OO, yes, we don't know how families are, but their case is ignorant of abusive parents. At least we differ for them in terms of independence when they say that you just have to fully rely on your parents. In conclusion, CG cannot win because they just assume that families are banks. They assume that just nuclear families have these exclusive harms, which they don't consider how extended families are literally the siblings of a nuclear family. But they also do not sufficiently respond to our independence argument. And independence is very important because it is how you're able to live. Stand for living. or some corny shit. Thank you so much.
Okay, wiki debate